And the recording will be available on the LWVCO website tomorrow, I believe. It should be tomorrow. My name is Kathy Wilson, and I'll be moderating this evening's forum regarding House Bill 22-1121, supporting local news. For those of you that don't know me, I'm a member of the Larimer League, and I am on the LWVCO's Legislative Action Committee. Jan Mormon and I have been following this bill and lobbying now in support for HB 22-1121. Two of the league's core principles undergird the league's support for this bill. We believe that democratic government depends on informed and active participation in government, and to achieve that informed participation, governmental bodies are required to protect the citizens' rights to know. So that is bedrock for us. That includes the right to know about what's happening in our local government, our local boards and agencies, the entities that impact our daily lives more than other levels of. That's where local news media comes into play. I don't know about you, but I believe that I'm pretty savvy about how government works. I'm also pretty busy, and I only occasionally have the time to go to observe what's happening at the Loveland City Council or the Thompson School District board meetings. So I look to the Loveland Reporter Herald and the Coloradoan and KUNC to keep me up to date. It's because of these outlets that I'm alerted to issues that are important to me, and I'm alerted when I need to tune into either the live broadcast later that day, or listen to the online archives of meetings so I can respond to the people that represent me. I want these outlets to continue their local reporting, and HB 22-1121 is a way that can help them keep going. We have 3 speakers this evening who are going to educate us on HB 1121 and what we as league members can do in an effective way to lead up into the bill being heard in the Appropriations Committee. That's what made this so urgent. The Appropriations Committee is like kneading through the eye of a needle, that we need to get this funding for this. Your questions in the chat, and then we can have a Q&A too. So let me introduce our speakers for tonight. First, we have Melissa Davis, and she has served as the director of the Colorado Media Project since January of 2020. She provides the day-to-day leadership for CMP's strategy and funding portfolio. She is a former print, online, and public radio journalist, and now vice president for Informed Communities at the Denver-based Gates Family Foundation. Her decade as a journalist includes award-winning education beat coverage for the Daily Breeze newspaper in Los Angeles, breaking news and digital content production for the Austin American Statesman, and the South Florida Sun Sentinel, and public radio news production for Voice of America in London, and KCRW and KCPP in Los Angeles. She serves on the membership committee for the National Media Impact Funders, on the leadership team for ComNet Denver, and as a founding board member for the Colorado News Cooperative. I'm going to introduce all three of you at once, and then we can just kind of flow between. Second, we have Steve Waldman, who is the co-founder and president of Report for America, and a service program for local journalists, and the chairman of Rebuild Local News Coalition, which represents 3,000 newsrooms and advocates for content neutral policies to support the future of the local press. Before founding Report for America, Waldman was a national correspondent for Newsweek and a national editor for U.S. News and World Reports. He also served as a special advisor to the CEO of the Corporation for National Community Service, now called AmeriCorps. He wrote a comprehensive FCC report, The Information Needs of Communities, the Changing Media Landscape in Broadcast Age, on US news media. Most recently, he's been an advocate for the Local Journalism Sustainability Act, which would provide an unprecedented degree of public support to the local press. Finally, we're going to have Anna Brugman, and Anna is a journalist and public policy researcher working for Rebuild Local News and Report for America. Before working in policy, she was a reporter covering education, health, and elections for hyperlocal, regional, and national publications. And also spent 2 years in Albania teaching media literacy and English as a Peace Corps volunteer. As you can see, we have a really good panel for this discussion today. So Melissa, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. And I'll try to keep my remarks brief, and it'd be great to just have a open conversation with you all. And I'm so happy to be here in the company of Steve and Anna. As Kathy mentioned, I'm here representing the Colorado Media Project and the Gates Family Foundation. But really just wanted to start by saying thanks so much to Kathy and Sonia and Tony for inviting us here to learn about this bill, and to Beth and the whole Colorado League for adopting local journalism as an issue that's worthy of your attention. And I know that it is something that is impacting communities across the nation. And I think the League is a real leader in that you're taking this on. So just thanks and kudos to you. This is an issue that I think you have an ally in the Colorado Media Project and in Gates. We represent the kind of philanthropic sector and the civic, to some extent, the civic leaders and business leaders in Colorado who are really recognizing that this issue is, and the decline of local news is impacting our communities. We can't have good civic conversations without trustworthy sources of local news. And so a lot of the work that the Colorado Media Project has been doing over the past 3.5 years here in Colorado really has to do with understanding the scope and scale of the problem, supporting a lot of research into who's the owners of our local news outlets, and how can we create good civic awareness of the issue and the impact, and also look for innovative solutions. So it's really under that banner that in 2019, the Colorado Media Project supported a cross-sector working group to look at public policy, potential public policy solutions at the state and local level. We were one of the first places in the nation to do something like that and to start thinking at the state and local level. There was some interest in some local communities, namely Longmont, where I'm a resident. I have 2 kids in the St. Vrain Public Schools, and I live here in Southwest Longmont. And there was quite a bit of concern as our local newspaper was getting thinner and thinner. So a number of residents and local leaders creating a new nonprofit, creating vehicles and interest at the public library as to how do you sustain local civic news. And so just a lot of really good conversations were happening. And so we supported a working group where we got together leaders from the Colorado Press Association, libraries, businesses, the Colorado Freedom of Information Coalition, to really look at what could we do in the public policy sphere that would not disrupt the really important wall between government and independent local media. And so I won't go into all those ideas and creative thinking that came out of that, but you can go online to our website at coloradomediaproject.com. And if you look under local news as a public good, you can see a report that has quite a bit of state level, like I said, scoping of the problem, the size. It looks at the ownership of all of the news outlets in local in Colorado. And we're now working with the Colorado College and the University of Denver to update that ownership information and to kind of put out there in a transparent way who owns the local news outlets, how much, what's the quantity of, Steve here, you're going to get to hear from a minute. He actually defined what do we think of as civic news. There's 8 categories of civic news that we really are concerned about protecting, and which outlets are producing that type of civic news and how much. So look out, if you aren't subscribed to our mailing list, please, you can do so. And when that report, and we're working with some developers to make kind of an interactive map that you can look at your county and see what sources of local news and who owns them and how much news they're producing. So, and if they're members or affiliates of the Colorado Press Association, and different quality indicators like that. So look out for that in the next few months, hopefully. And just like I said, think of the Colorado Media Project as an ally here. We're a member of the Rebuild Local News Coalition, and worked with Steve and Anna on the to help advocate for the federal legislation, yeah, just really excited to have the league as a nonpartisan democracy advocate really entering into this conversation. So just again, thanks to all of you, and thanks to Anna and Steve for being here, and I'm going to hand it over to them.
Thank you so much for having me. The national legislation was constructed with an eye toward this incredible destructive trend that is going across the whole country. And you've probably heard some of the numbers, but it still is staggering to me. There's 1,800 communities in America that have no local news at all. There's at least 1,000, if not 2,000 more, that have ghost newspapers, which are basically barely covering anything at all. And there's been almost a 60% drop in the number of reporters. And this is in about 15 years. We're not talking about over a 70-year period. The collapse of local news has been so dramatic and so fast. And the threats to democracy and to communities so severe that it's really taken, it's been hard to kind of get people awakened to just what is happening, because the threats are really very meaningful. We know, academic research is now kind of backing up what I think we all would know intuitively, which is that if you don't have local news, it's very hard for a community to solve their own problems. And it's hard for residents to know what schools to go have their kids go to, or what hospitals are working, or how to hold public officials accountable, et cetera, et cetera. So all this in Colorado, because Colorado has been one of the hardest hit states. 56% drop in newspaper circulation, which I think is one of the biggest in the country. I think probably some of that was the Alden global rampage. So it's very exciting that you're taking a lead on this. And as Melissa and Kathy said, there is a bit of a paradox to trying to construct media policy to help local news. Like, it's, we're we're really hesitant about having the government give journalists money. It's just really counter to, you know, what we believe. Like, how can journalists be effective watchdogs if they're getting money from the people they're supposed to be watching? On the other hand, the crisis is so severe and the damage to communities is so important that we have to do something. So we all, both nationally and in the Colorado coalitions that Melissa leads, have tried to put, you know, give a lot of thought to what, not just the impulse to help, but the right way to do it in a way that would really get the job done, but also be First Amendment friendly. And I think the approach that you all have taken is a really good one, because it gets support to local journalism through revenue stream, which is their regular business model. And but the decisions on who gets supported in a micro way are actually made by small businesses and community groups, not by, you know, a government agency or someone deciding, I like this media outlet, I like that media outlet. So it's a very clever and creative approach, I think, that it gets the help to the local news media, but it's a twofer. You're benefiting local business. By the way, when we say local business, we tend to think of local businesses, restaurants, dry cleaners. Well, that includes local nonprofits too. Like that, it also includes the, you know, museum and the parks and civic institutions. They can use this too. So, and the last thing I just want to say is, I know this is going to sound a little bit hyperbolic, but I actually think that the League of Women Voters involvement in this and leadership on this could be potentially historic, not just in Colorado, but in the country as a whole. And the reason I say that is that, you know, up until now, honestly, it's been people in the news industry saying, yo, this is kind of a big deal. We should do something about this. And of course, we are affected by the collapse of local news, but really that's like, you know, just a fraction of the problem. The real problem is what it's doing to communities. So it's absolutely essential that the leadership on this ultimately comes from non-journalism groups, the groups that just care about democracy and care about healthy communities. And there's just no one that I can think of that has the reputation for, you know, integrity and nonpartisanship more than the League of Women Voters. So, and you're out ahead a little bit of the other states. Colorado, thanks to Melissa, is cutting edge. And so we're hoping that it will be cutting edge both in getting this passed and in the role that League of Women Voters plays, so that we can talk it up as a model in the rest of the country as well as here.
I'll jump in and just give a little update on HB22-1121. Like Kathy said earlier, we're headed towards our most challenging test yet, the House Appropriations Committee. The bill has made it through Business Affairs and Labor and Finance. And now it's on to Appropriations, which is its last hurdle before the House. Appropriations does not take testimony, which is why we are super excited to chat with y'all, and we hope that you'll feel comfortable reaching out to your representative in favor of this bill. But to that end, we'd be happy to take any questions y'all might have about the bill.
Can I add to why this is so important? Appropriations just passed the long bill out of that committee, and that's the budget. And so everybody's been, all the legislators have been waiting to see at least this first shot at what the budget is going to be and how much money they're going to spend and where they're going to place that money, what bills they're going to push. And so if you if you and your colleagues at the different local leagues can let our representatives know that this is important to you, you're a member of the league, and this is important to you, that it's part of the citizens' rights to know. So, Anna, I don't know if you were going to go into this, but
I'm happy to go into anything. I didn't know how detailed you wanted me to get, but I can get quite detailed. we
were Anna and I were talking about this on the phone today about what you can do and what are effective things for you to do. Because sometimes legislators don't listen to people who aren't their constituents, but we're all across the state really, really want to push this. So Anna, you want to give them the advice that we had talked about?
Sure, I'd love to. So Melissa and I worked on some talking points earlier today that we'll be sending out to Kathy, and y'all can look over those. At the bottom of that, if you scroll all the way down, I put in some pointers for things that talking points that are useful when you're talking to your representative. If your representative is not on the House Appropriations Committee, that by no means that your point of view is not important. Hopefully this will pass House Appropriations and it will go to a floor vote, in which case your point of view is incredibly important. And we would love your representative to know beforehand that this is a bill we're watching and we care about, because it's about the health of our local communities. You can also ask your representative to let their colleagues in appropriations know that this is an important bill to your constituents, and they can weigh in with their colleagues. And so just because you don't see a representative underneath the House Appropriations banner does not mean that your voice is not important and that your point of view is not one that we want heard.
Great. I know that I'm going to invite you to raise your hands, because that'll be one way that we can see that you want to ask a question. I'm going to ask Jory Kramer. I know that you sent in a question about underwriting versus advertising.
I did, and I know that I didn't make that question very clear, that underwriting and sponsorship versus advertising on a nonprofit gets really complicated. I was just reading the NPR guideline or the public broadcasting guidelines the other day on it, and it is complicated. But if a business opts to take the charitable deduction for their contribution, however it goes, to a nonprofit news outlet, would they still be eligible for this charitable deduction, or would that be considered double dipping?
If the language in the Colorado bill is the same as the language in the federal bill, they can't double dip. But note that the provision is not a deduction; it's a credit. So what they ought to do is not take the deduction, take the credit, because it's 2 to 3 times more valuable to the entity. And that's so you can't double dip, but it's a more valuable thing than the existing law. But I leave to others to confirm that that's the way the Colorado bill is written.
Yes, that was taken from the federal legislation, and the Colorado broadcasters were integral in vetting the underwriting language in HB 22-1121.
I think that one of the things that people find confusing is that the newspapers don't get a tax credit. It's the businesses who are going to advertise that get the tax credit, and hopefully they will. Because they're getting this tax credit, they'll have more revenue that they can advertise in their local papers. Tony.
And of course, there's also a secondary benefit, which is that it helps the businesses and hopefully generates, economic activity in the community.
Yes, yes. Tony.
So I'm wondering what the fiscal note is on this. That's it.
Okay, great. What a concise question. We haven't gotten a new note since the subscription tax was removed, but it's estimated between 6 and 9 million, which would account for about 25% of the new spending in the Democrats' budget. They get about 20 million of new spending this year, which is also why we're really excited to be talking to you guys, because if you can tell them that we think this is a priority, that would be very helpful as they set their own budget priorities.
So is this, so they have the budget, they've passed the budget. We know that there'll be amendments and they'll play around with it for a while. Is this part of the special pool of money, discretionary money that they will be using to, okay, so that's a point that could be made, and they've got how much discretionary money? Do we know?
A little over 20 million, but not much.
Okay.
Tony, can you talk about the significance of that for people?
I defer to Tony, frankly.
Yeah, every year they do the budget, and then the caucuses, Democrats, Republicans, decide what's left over. That's not a good term, but what's not being budgeted. And they can try to get money for their own projects. There is a lot of pull and tug on that process of trying to get what they want funded. So, so we really do need to make the case for this project, because if we don't, we'll probably, this project will probably just be pushed under the rug and nobody will pay attention to it. So it's extremely important that we continue to contact our legislators.
Thank you. Linda.
So I have two questions. When does this go to appropriations? Do you know when it goes to appropriations? Did you say?
It hasn't been scheduled yet. I was looking today and didn't see that it was scheduled yet.
Okay.
But there's, there were so many bills that are backed up waiting for the long bill to pass that I think they're just lining them up now. The first April 1st was, I think, the first set that went through.
So we have time to write a lot of letters then, because it's not scheduled. Right. Okay. And then the question I have about the bill specifically is, can you explain how the advertising will not go? Can you explain how this does not help pink slime journalism? Somebody.
Yeah, that's a great question. And there was a lot of time spent on trying to address that problem, because that's one of the ones where, if you had a government agency or something looking at that to prevent it, you would cross over into having too much government control over content. So you need to come up with rules that are a little more, check the box kinds of objective rules rather than subjective rules on how to do it. So what we came up with, and Anna, you'll have to check me on this of whether or not I'm getting this right in terms of the Colorado bill, but there's a few different things. So one is, we said the news organization needs to carry media liability insurance. So that's a sort of a check in the sense of, like, to get media liability insurance, you got to go and convince an insurer that you are reputable. It is possible to get media liability insurance even if you are not reputable, but it's a lot more expensive and hard. So it's not a foolproof rule, but we think that'll help. That you're supposed to disclose the ownership of the organization. That, again, is one where a lot of the pink slime sites don't. You're not allowed to be a 501c4 advocacy group, or maybe it was, I can't remember what we ended up with in Colorado, but there were limits on advocacy groups being eligible. And that was because, again, in a number of cases, the pink slime sites are basically funded by dark political money. And, the dark money is hard to regulate because it's dark, but at least this, kind of excludes the direct funding from political advocacy groups. And then I actually forgot, Nana, does this also have the requirement for a minimum of one local reporter?
And actually, we adopted another piece to that was suggested by actually a Republican lawmaker that we need to follow back up with. But that a majority of the employees at a local Colorado news title must live in Colorado. And so there's actually two pieces to that.
Wow.
And actually, we also adopted a league suggestion that 501c6s are also excluded. So the league was already at the table or helping us out so long ago. But Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that covers all of them. And the hope was, there wasn't going to be one single thing that would knock out the pink slime sites. So we just tried to add various different levels of protection and think that the combination of all those things should do a pretty good job.
They also can't be a 527.
Yes.
Oh, yes, right. Thank
station.
you.
And when I read that, the 527s, it's like, oh yeah, this covers a whole lot. So that made that, those elements really helped the league to come to a support position on this from how it was originally written.
And there's a question in the chat about whether or not the bill is following along polarized political lines like most things do these days. So far, every person who has voted in favor of the bill has been a Democrat. There are folks, like I said, who have provided substantive critiques of the bill that we've adopted that are Republicans. And so I'm hoping that with outreach, we can reach back out and maybe flip some of those votes when it goes to a floor vote. This provision does have bipartisan roots. Steve, if you want to talk about the bipartisan roots of the Local Journalism Sustainability Act.
Well, and what's happening in Wisconsin. So the original Local Journalism Sustainability Act was co-authored by a Republican, Dan Newhouse from Washington State. It was a very bipartisan bill, had about 20 different Republican co-sponsors in the House. And this provision was one of the reasons. Then in Wisconsin, they have basically introduced something very similar to what you're working on. It's entirely a Republican bill. It was authored by a key leading Republican lawmaker going through. It's a very Republican legislature. They've gotten support from the business community and the all-important Tavern League, because I'm told that Wisconsin is still the highest per capita beer consumption in America. So if you don't get the Tavern League on board, you're out of luck, and they got the Tavern League. So so it's easy for me to say, I'm not the one on the ground doing the work that you are in Colorado, but of all the provisions out there, of all the different possible approaches to helping local news, this is the one that should have the best possibility of getting Republican support. So I know that's not the way our world works necessarily. The fact that some Democrats support it may mean that no Republicans will ever support it. But on the substance of it, this should be one that ought to get up, because essentially the decisions about which media organizations are going to get subsidized are being made by small businesses. If you can't support that, then you're not really, interested in supporting local news.
So one of the questions that I received before this meeting was, tell us about hedge funds. Is the Denver Post the only hedge fund owned in Colorado, or how much might they benefit or not benefit from it?
So, I can take on at least some of that answer. So it's true that the Denver Post and about 20 or so, I can't remember the latest count, 20 or so other Colorado newspapers are owned by Alden Global Capital. There's also, Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, but Gannett and Gatehouse, are they in the same hedge fund category?
It's kind of good. There's a big debate about that. I think they're hedge fund influenced and not hedge fund controlled at this particular second.
Okay, so when you really think about, when people talk about hedge funds, they are usually talking about Alden Global Capital, and they're pretty big here in Colorado in terms of the ownership. But that said, I think the big point that we learned when we did the study of ownership across the state was that if you think about readership, more than half of local readers are served by small businesses, local media businesses that are owned, that are actually themselves small businesses. So there are still just dozens of, small business owners who run media businesses. And so these are really the outlets that would be helped in a big way. And we certainly don't want to forget locally owned ethnic media. There's a lot of very small local businesses that really reach unique audiences that with an incentive like this, I think it gives an extra incentive for local businesses to think more creatively about keeping their ad dollars local and supporting other local businesses. So I think that's really the majority of where the tax credits would go. The reimbursement or the tax credits are they're not huge, right? Like, so a lot of people have been talking about like worrying about, will it go to Tegna, which owns 9 News or these bigger outlets. Those dollars, the tax incentives won't get you very far at those big outlets. Where they're really going to be a big leverage is at these very smaller, more targeted rural or ethnic local media outlets. So Steve, you want to elaborate on that?
I think that's a really good answer. I mean, I guess the only other thing is, if you're a business person that really that is offended by the ownership of a newspaper by Alden, don't support them. It's a voluntary program, and you can even tell your friends not to support them. I mean, it's sort of, if there's a strong sentiment against supporting Alden, people are perfectly, free to vote with their choices. I mean, at least the small businesses are. But I think Melissa had a really good answer.
And to add on to that, just to piggyback on what Melissa said about advertisers now having a new pool to use to direct their local advertising dollars. I did a case study on the Baltimore African American when we were looking at the federal legislation. And that's exactly what they said their advertising department would do, is this would give them a tool to reach out to local small businesses, especially local small businesses in the Black community in Baltimore and Washington, D.C., and encourage them to come advertise with them for the first time. And that creates a relationship and a habit. And so the benefits of the bill are that relationship building. It's not quantitative. I can't put a dollar amount on that relationship. But there's habit building and relationship building that are kind of inherent in the nature of this provision.
And the hope is that for that reason, this isn't just a temporary, burst of support, and it'll just go back to the way it was. This is like, it's actually trying to stimulate a deeper relationship between the small businesses and the news organizations. Now, the news organizations have to deliver. It's incumbent on them to serve these businesses well, because they're getting this shot. They're getting this extra chance, second chance, from the businesses, some of whom haven't advertised before. But our sense is that it's a moment that that the antagonism and suspicion of social media as a place for people to spend their advertising is sort of, is rising, and that people increasingly would like to find other ways to spend their marketing money if they could, and this could nudge some of them in that direction.
So
I just dropped some, just FYI, I dropped some, the publishers had some really good, testimony at some of these hearings, and I just dropped some of their comments in the chat just so that you can see them. But, B. Harris, who owns and publishes the Denver Urban Spectrum for the last 35 years, talked about there being 400 plus Black-owned businesses, that this would give them some money in their pockets to advertise in the Denver Urban Spectrum and other outlets. Chris Fresquez from El Seminario talked about the main source of revenue being from advertising, and that this would really help them out. So I think those are those are some of the voices that you'd hear from the publishers themselves, and also the small businesses that advertise there.
This was kind of a good segue to one of the questions that I received, which is, will there be outreach to small businesses to let them know this opportunity exists, and why local ads may be a better buy than social media? So I don't know.
Yeah, I think that this is like really rallying. It's really exciting to see the Press Association think about how they can message all of this because they did quite a bit of really great independent research. They funded some independent research, and we can drop a link, maybe Anna, if you want to drop a link into the chat, but they have a lot of, data now on how effective advertising in local media is. It's more trusted. It has a huge audience. A lot of these ideas that it isn't effective are misnomer and kind of a belief of, that we've just acquired. But this is, they have some really good data.
And I think one of the things that came to mind as you were talking, Melissa, was just listening to the conversations in some of the meetings that I've been in with all of you. And I know that one of the things that you're asking people to do is to contact chambers of commerce and other local newspapers just to get the word out that way too. So more people will contact their representatives to tell them to support this bill. And
this is not to scare the if there's anyone from the Treasury Department, the Treasury here, I hope this doesn't scare them, but this is an entitlement. So if they estimate that 200 businesses in the community are going to use it, and actually it's 500 businesses that use it, the 500 get it. There's not a cap on this. Now, we shouldn't say that publicly because we don't want to scare anyone on the price, but it is exciting in terms of activating the chambers of commerce and stuff like that. If it turns out that we're underestimating the popularity of this, that will just be even more, benefit for both the communities and the news organizations.
I had one last question on my list that was sent to me. Knowing that this can't bring the dead back alive, is there a plan in the future to support news deserts where this bill doesn't help them because you can't buy ads in a dead newspaper? How can we try to get that going in the cities and towns in Colorado that have lost their newspapers or their news media outlet?
So,
I bet Melissa has some ideas on that. I have a couple too, but go ahead, Melissa.
yeah, well, I was just going to say, so this is kind of where I will just say that the Larimer League is kind of leading the way in some of this ways of thinking. The Media Project, didn't really start as a kind of journalism forward thing. It's really how do we solve the issue of a lack of local news. So, there are many communities that don't have enough local news or are news deserts, as you say, but the Media Project is kind of trying to innovate in different ways. And so you can check out our website for one thing, but one of the things that we're really doing, we're supporting is the Colorado News Collaborative, which is a coalition of journalists from about 170 different newsrooms across the state. And so they are sharing content and helping one another kind of do more with less and to try and reach into communities that don't have local news. So kind of be on the lookout for what they're up to, and really hosting conversations. We've started doing this, and we'll continue to do this with the media, with the Colorado News Collaborative. But a lot of times it takes some creative residents to figure out what the next solution is, because this is an industry that is changing quite a bit, and community-based solutions are really what we're after. So Steve, you want to jump in?
Yeah, well, that's really well said. There needs to be more help. But I was talking to Elizabeth Hansen the other day, who is the head of the National Trust for Local News, who was instrumental in working with you at the Colorado News Conservancy, and that you all pulled together. And she was making a really interesting point to me, which is that when they go to potential financial backers, whether it's a bank or a foundation or anything like that, part of what they're looking at, those potential funders, is what's the revenue stream? Like, am I going to waste this money, or does this business have a chance? So if you have something like this that actually helps the revenue stream of the business, it's going to help. It's therefore going to also help them get financing. And she thought that could even extend to creating new news organizations in news deserts. If you're an entrepreneur, either private or a nonprofit, looking to raise money, and you can say, yeah, we've got all this foundation stuff, but we also have seen in these other communities that as a result of this creative tax credit, it's increased the revenue streams for these folks. And we've done an inventory, and there's X number of small businesses in this community, and we think they're going to use this tax credit. And so we can come in starting with, we will predict a revenue stream into this, so please lend us money. And that would be a strong argument, because part of what any kind of lender is looking at is whether or not there's some hope to your business model, and this provides that hope.
Great. Linda, I'm going to segue to you for a minute. Do you want to give a plug to the new task force?
Okay, well, the League of Women Voters of Larimer County was invited by the League of Women Voters of Colorado to start a task force on news access and literacy. And our mission is to start a statewide conversation on the importance of news access and literacy, with a goal of a state or national position on news access and literacy. We've just started working, so, and Joy's on the task force and Kathy's on the task force. So let's see where we go.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah.
And we have applied to caucus at our convention, but I have not heard any further about it, so.
And Linda's talking about the National League of Women Voters
Yeah.
convention. So we'll try
Which
to.
is in Denver this year,
Fingers
right?
crossed.
It is
Yeah.
in Denver. It is in Denver.
Oh, wow. When is that?
June
23rd,
Mhm.
23rd? Yeah.
Have
June
you
23rd.
proposed doing a panel or anything on this topic?
Yes, the League of Women Voters of Larimer County has already, we have a template we work with, that we did a local program called Don't Ghost Your Local News. And it has 3 parts. One is the history of journalism. One is why the League of Women Voters should love news access and news literacy. And the other part was news literacy and what you can, as a citizen, can do to promote news literacy and news access. So we're going to start with that. Probably the middle part will be the big part.
Could you send me that? That sounds incredible.
Okay.
If you don't mind, I'd love to share that with others.
Yeah, me too, Linda. I don't know if I have it.
Okay.
And do you
so-
think, I mean, maybe I'm getting greedy here, but is there just, I'm trying to goad you a little bit into trying to goad the National League of Women Voters of whether or not you all could kind of lead the way and try to stimulate a conversation at the national convention about the public policy stuff that you're working on, as well as the other things. Is that premature, or is that something you think that you might be able to interest them in? Or are they tired of your badgering them on important issues?
It's
Well,
already happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think.
What's already happening, the badgering or the?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Well, we call it lobbying.
I think that's the right legal term.
Good one.
So yeah, we will see what we will see with that. Are there? I don't know if I missed. I don't think I missed any questions. And thank you, Anna, for helping me watch the chat. Are there any questions? Anybody else? Anybody else at all?
Kathy, would you please say something about the follow-up and the materials that we will?
Thank you. I knew there was something I needed to say about that. So again, we are recording this, and we'll have this on the League of Women Voters of Colorado website tomorrow with their YouTube recordings that are there. We will send out the link to that site, and you all, including the speakers, will be getting this, this email. So it's going to be, that will be sent out. What else? Anna is sending me a fact sheet and suggestions about how you might approach your legislators. Know that if you call them and then you write them right after that, it's like a doubly positive punch to get that message across, because you can't repeat a good idea enough times, okay? My background in educational psychology can tell you there's research to back that up. So don't be afraid to repeat a good idea.
And they're just suggestions. The important thing is that your lawmakers know that you care about local news. And so communicating how you use local news, what would happen if your local news was less robust, if it went away, how it affects local democracy, why the league thinks it's important, that's what's important. The actual nitty-gritty language is not as important. What's important is that your lawmakers know that you care and you are paying attention to this bill.
Mm-hmm. Also, no, I'm going to take the links out of the chat and add those links for you. You can right now save the chat by clicking on chat, and when it opens up toward the bottom, you'll see what looks like a paper and a happy face and 3 dots. Click on the 3 dots.
You know,
your
Kathy,
yep.
Thanks so much, but we will actually send the chat box text out with the video link.
You are awesome.
Zoom makes it easy.
Oh, yes. Yes,
Yeah.
indeed. I try to teach people how to fish and not give them the fish. So
I appreciate it.
So the lady who's just been speaking, Beth Hendricks, is the executive director for the League of Women Voters of Colorado. And I will also introduce Andrea Wilkins, who is our lobbyist, actually our liaison to the legislature. So those 2 people are instrumental and very important.
And Karen Sheik is on the call as well.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Good.
And Karen is
State president.
yes.
Mhm.
Yes.
I wanted to mention too, just that in terms of the bill, the Colorado Press Association obviously has been really leading a lot of the lobbying and working with Anna and Steve and, kind of on the legislation. So I dropped the link to their page in the chat, which has a lot of good stuff. It's really directed toward their members and whatnot, but certainly, nonpartisan civic advocates like the League can take a lot of their points. And Anna and I have been working on a few things that are specific for you all that we'll send around by email afterwards.
Okay, great. So we'll get that letter out with all of that information tomorrow. And please, everybody that's on here, share it with your local leagues, okay? Because this is a time-sensitive communication that we want to get as many members of the league to contact their legislators. They'll see how, what a powerful group we are, or we can be if we do this. Okay. All right.
None to that. Thank you all for taking it on as an issue.
Well, thank you,
so much.
Melissa and Steve and Anna, for
Thank you.
joining us. It was great. Every time I'm with you, I learn more things about this, and it's so appreciative. We're so appreciative for it. So everyone, have
And
a
thank
good
you to
evening.
Kathy.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much,
thank you,
Kathy.
Kathy, so much.
Mhm.
Thank you. Thanks, Beth. Thanks, Tony.
All right.
Thank
Everybody have
you.
a good evening.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care.